Hi, I'm Ted Yacucci. Thank you so much for tuning into the channel. And if you have watched some of my JFK assassination videos in the past, you might start to get the idea that I'm a little bit obsessed with Ruth and Michael Paine. And it is true, because I think studying the Paines is one of the clearest pathways to getting to the truth of the JFK assassination and who the conspirators really were. So today what I'd like to do is really kind of delve into some facts that no one can dispute. No lone nut Warren Commission believer can dispute or argue these facts, especially about Ruth Payne. I have 32 of them. Let's jump right in and then we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. Ruth Payne attends a gathering on February 22, 1963, given by Everett D. Glover, an associate of George de Mohrenschildt, a known CIA asset. De Mohrenschildt shows up with Lee and Marina Oswald. De Mohrenschildt has been assisting the Oswalds since they returned from the Soviet Union. Although Ruth admits to the Warren Commission she barely spoke to Marina at the party, she asked for Marina's address before leaving. Ruth writes a letter to the Oswalds within a day of the party. Ruth drops in unannounced with her two children to the Oswald's residence 1 week to 10 days after the party and stays for about 1 hour. Ruth again drops in unannounced for another visit with her children to the Oswald residence for a second visit within 10 days of the first visit. On April 2, 1963, Ruth sends her supposedly estranged husband, Michael, to pick up Lee and Marina and bring them to the Paine household for dinner, and then drive the Oswalds the 45 minutes back home. On the 20th of April, Ruth invites herself to a picnic with the Oswalds near their Nearly Street apartment. Again, she brings her children. 4 days later, on April 24th, Ruth drops in with her children, again unannounced, to the Oswald residence and finds them packed and ready to go to the bus station for a move to New Orleans. Ruth convinces the Oswalds to let Marina stay with her while Lee gets settled in New Orleans. Marie and the baby stay with Ruth at her house for 10 days. On the 10th of May, Ruth insists Marina not take the bus to New Orleans, but drives Marina to New Orleans herself, where she surveys the new Oswald residence. Ruth writes several more letters to Marina, suggesting in each letter that she come back and live with her. In the summer of 1963, Ruth takes her two children on a cross-country trip, visiting relatives, and heads to Nashon Island near Cape Cod, owned by her estranged husband Michael's relatives, for an extended visit. Michael Paine's mother is best friends with Mary Bancroft, a U.S. spy and the mistress of CIA Director Allen Dulles. Dulles and Bancroft are also frequent visitors to Nashon Island. From Nashon Island, Ruth travels to Falls Church, Virginia, to visit with her sister, Sylvia Hoke, and her husband. Hoke is a psychologist for the CIA since 1952, and her husband works for the Agency for International Development, a CIA front company. Ruth leaves her sister's home and travels to New Orleans to pick up Marina Oswald and her child and bring them to her home in Dallas. It is 2 months before the JFK assassination. Lee moves back to Dallas on October 3rd, but takes a room at 1026 North Beckley Avenue. He visits the Paine household and stays nearly every weekend until the assassination. Michael Paine, Ruth's supposedly estranged husband, also visits and stays at the Paine household nearly every weekend and takes Lee to 6 political meetings, including an extreme right-wing John Birch Society meeting. FBI agents visit the Paine household multiple times in the 2 months prior to the assassination. Ruth hands the FBI a copy of a letter written in Ruth's handwriting that she says she copied from a letter that Lee wrote and left in her house. It is addressed to the Soviet embassy in Washington and references a meeting Oswald is supposed to have had with Soviet agent Valery Kostikov in Mexico City in September. The Russian embassy disavows the letter and immediately turns it over to U.S. authorities. The Russians accuse Ruth Payne of having written the letter herself. Ruth Payne gets Lee a job at the Texas School Book Depository, even though a better offer elsewhere is also available, but never presented to Lee. JFK is assassinated at 12:29 p.m. Dallas time on November 22, 1963. Within an hour of the assassination, Michael Paine telephones Ruth in an intercepted call and tells her that Lee Oswald will be blamed for the murder, but they both know who was really responsible. Police show up at Ruth's door the afternoon of the assassination and search the premises. 6 filing cabinets are removed from the Paine household, as reported by Dallas police, and they contain the names of pro-Castro sympathizers in the Dallas area. The police return the next day and in a second search find the backyard photos of Lee Oswald holding a rifle. The CIA sends Washington a false picture of Lee Oswald and a recording of his voice from Mexico City. The whole idea of Lee Oswald in Mexico City is falling apart. Ruth suddenly says she checks a drawer in her home and finds some trinkets that she associates with Lee and Mexico City. Ruth will provide a letter, she says, found in a book, supposedly written by Lee Oswald, claiming responsibility for a failed attempt on the life of General Edwin Walker on April 10th. None of the 4 witnesses will place anyone of Lee's description at the scene. 2 weeks after the assassination, and after the garage has been thoroughly searched multiple times, the Imperial reflex camera, used to take the infamous backyard photos, will show up in a duffel bag in Ruth's garage. That duffel bag was already searched again weeks earlier with no camera inside. Ruth and Michael will suddenly end their estrangement and move back in together within 30 days of the assassination. Ruth will receive over 5,000 questions from the Warren Commission about Lee and Marina Oswald. In 1979, Ruth travels to Nicaragua and is reported by multiple sources as taking photos and detailed information for the CIA about the indigenous Sandinista population who are fighting the illegal CIA-sponsored Contras. Ruth will spend the next 61 years, up to today, only accepting interviews from reporters or researchers who she knows will allow her to portray Lee Oswald in a negative light and not question her on the inconsistencies, lies, and absurdities in her relationship with the Oswalds or her multiple family ties with U.S. intelligence, especially the CIA. So it's obvious that George de Mohrenschildt has been babysitting Lee Oswald since he returned from the Soviet Union, and now he's turned Lee Oswald over to Ruth and Michael Paine. That happened at the Everett Glover party on February 22nd, 1963, exactly 9 months before the assassination. Well, what happens then? Then, as we showed in those 32 steps there, we show that Ruth Payne all of a sudden starts showing up at the Oswald household about 45 minutes away from where she lives, even though Ruth has two very small children and she's supposedly estranged from her husband Michael, but she starts indoctrinating herself into the Oswald's life. She shows up once about a week after the party. She shows up again about a week after that, both unannounced. Then a couple weeks go by and she has her husband Michael pick them up and bring them back for dinner. Then she shows up at a picnic unannounced, and 4 days after the picnic she shows up again, and this is important. She shows up exactly when the Oswalds are all packed up, getting ready to go to the bus station and move to New Orleans, because Lee's time at Yacucci Stovall is over and he's on other assignments in New Orleans. She'll say, Ruth Payne will say, it's because he was looking for work. He wasn't looking for work. He had other assignments from intelligence agencies that he was working for, and that's why he was moving to New Orleans. But anyway, she shows up exactly on that day. Lee Oswald did need to get settled in New Orleans, so he's okay allowing Marina to spend the next 10 days with Ruth Payne while he's getting settled in New Orleans. And then what happens after that? Well, instead of Marina getting on the bus and going to New Orleans, Ruth says, no, I'll grab my two small children. We'll go the hundreds and hundreds of miles. I'll take you to New Orleans, which she did. That gave her a chance to survey where the Oswalds were living and all the people that they were associating with in New Orleans. From there, she takes her cross-country trip in the summer of 1963. She goes to Nelshan Island, where her mother is, of course, best friends with American spy Mary Bancroft, and her is having an affair with Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and so we've got all those intelligence assets that are also visiting Nelshan Island. What's really important is, though, after she leaves Nelshan Island, she goes to Falls Church, Virginia, to meet with her sister, Sylvia Hoke, who she will deny, but is a psychologist for the CIA since 1952. Hoke's husband works for the Agency for International Development, a CIA front company. And as we showed in our last video, they were the only people that the Warren Commission didn't ask multiple questions about when Ruth said that she did go visit them. They didn't ask, well, who does your sister work for? They didn't ask, who does your sister's husband work for? Everyone else, they had asked those questions in great detail. But anyway, she picks up Marina Oswald at the end of that summer trip and takes her back to Dallas. And again, this is the reason that Lee Oswald is probably allowing all this to happen is because he's on multiple assignments for intelligence in New Orleans. We know that he's working for Guy Bannister, the ex-CIA station chief. The ex-FBI station chief in Chicago. He's working with him, training anti-Castro paramilitary groups along Lake Pontchartrain. He's also infiltrating some of these anti-Castro groups when he's finding out about possible assassination attempts. And it's almost certain that Lee Oswald was the informant for the Chicago plot. Along with that, he's seen with David Ferry, with Clay Shaw in Clinton, Louisiana in the summer of '63. And they're doing all the stuff that they're doing. And again, Lee Oswald he's working for the Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans. So he's got all of these assignments. He's not going to be able to be home. He's on the road. He's doing what he needs to do. Whether he went to Mexico City or not, at the end of that summer, he's already got a ton of other things that is proven. So what happens is that when Ruth Payne keeps indoctrinating herself into Marina's life, it actually works out for Lee because she is going to have a baby. He's not able to be home all the time because of these intelligence assignments. So it makes sense that he would allow that to happen. And then what happens when Ruth gets Marina at home? Lee, on October 3rd, he moves back to Dallas to the Beckley Street apartment, but he's there every weekend at Ruth Payne's house to spend the time with his family. Michael Paine, who again is supposedly estranged from Ruth, also is there amazingly every weekend and spends every weekend there. And Michael Paine takes Lee to 6 political meetings, including a John Birch meeting. So we know that he's being set up for whatever is going to happen later, that they can go back and say that Lee was politically wacky and all the stuff that they're setting him up for. What happens? The FBI starts visiting the Paine household. Ruth Payne turns over the famous Soviet letter where she's written in her handwriting that she says that she copied from a letter that Lee Oswald wrote, but it's claiming that Lee is sending a letter and referencing a Soviet agent named Valery Kostakov, who's an assassination expert, and claiming that Lee says, "I'm sorry, we couldn't finish our business in Mexico City." It's so fake, it's so phony that the Russian embassy turns it over immediately to U.S. authorities, and nobody believes it. Not U.S. authorities, nobody believes it from what what we know now. And the Soviet embassy claims that Ruth Payne just wrote it out of thin air, which pretty much the U.S. U.S. authorities also believe. But from there, what does she do? She gets Lee the job at the Texas School Book Depository. She finds the General Walker letter, which Lee supposedly took guilt in the failed shooting of General Walker in April of 1963. When the Mexico City story is absolutely falling apart, the CIA has sent the FBI the wrong picture of Lee Oswald, the wrong voice of Lee Oswald. Well, who comes to the rescue? It's Ruth Payne. How does she do that? She says that she found some trinkets from Mexico City in a drawer that apparently no one had looked into, even though John Kennedy had been assassinated and police had been at her home multiple times. Nobody had looked in there except Ruth when she needed to find some supposed trinkets from Mexico City. And then what happens after that? Well, let's go back to the day of the assassination, which is really, really important. First of all, a half hour, 30 minutes after the actual shots ring out in Dealey Plaza, there's a phone call from Bell Helicopter from Michael Paine to Ruth Payne at home. He says that Lee Oswald is going to be blamed for the assassination, but they both know who is really responsible. So that happened. What else happened? 6 filing cabinets are taken from Ruth Payne's home, and Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters reports that Dallas Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters reports that there are 6 file cabinets full of information about pro-Castro sympathizers in the Dallas area, which would prove that Ruth and Michael were certainly working with intelligence to gather information on those folks. So from there, the backyard photos are found in Ruth Payne's home the day after the assassination, but 2 weeks after the assassination, after everything has been searched multiple times, in the garage, in a duffel bag supposedly belonging to Lee Oswald, the Imperial reflex camera that took the backyard photos is suddenly found, even though that duffel bag has been searched already. So, and also a Minox spy camera belonging to Michael Paine is found. So it's absolutely, it's almost ludicrous, the number of times that Ruth Payne provides so-called evidence against Lee Oswald as the case moves forward. And that's why the Warren Commission will ask her over 5,000 questions. And a lot of those questions are her opinion of Lee Oswald. Well, how did he seem here? Do you think he did that? So ridiculous, because she's able to set a worldview of Lee Oswald that nobody else will agree with. Everybody else will say, hey, he's a pretty nice guy. But Ruth Payne will personally take it upon herself to incriminate and indoctrinate Lee Oswald into that assassination to a degree that no one else will. And she has done that for the last 61 years by not taking any real questions about her involvement in the JFK assassination and Marina and Lee Oswald. All she does is take questions from reporters and researchers that she already qualifies, that she knows will ask her the questions that she wants to be able to be asked in order to keep perpetrating the lies and the obfuscation and the ridiculous stories that she has told about Lee Oswald. And it's horrible. And who suffers the most? You know, we all do as an American society. And I feel especially bad for the 59,000 families that lost men and women in the Vietnam War, or the over 300,000 families that had wounded in that war. Because 4 days after John Kennedy was assassinated, NASAM 263, which would have prevented and pulled out all of our U.S. forces in Vietnam by 1965, was reversed within 4 days of the assassination. And companies like Bell Helicopter and Industrial America and all the people that Allen Dulles represented got very, very rich. And Ruth Payne, she can say that, well, even to herself, she can say that she was just doing the work that was assigned to her. But she's taken 61 years now to keep perpetrating those lies, and she's 92 years old. My hope is that before she passes, maybe the truth will come out. I doubt it, but maybe. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.